And we're live! Hello, friends! Welcome. I see Lazy Duck in the chat. Hello! And Mel is here. Hello! Hi, everybody! It's good to see y'all. Let me turn this down a little bit. And we have friend of the stream, AdmiralLove, not only in the chat, but also in the Discord. You want to say hey, man?
Hey, Johnny. Hi, chat.
Excellent.
Happy Saturday.
Happy Saturday. It's good to be here. I am going to be asking a bunch of questions because this is a topic that I have thought about, but that I never really had anyone to discuss this with. AdmiralLove is going to be chilling with me today, and we may take some more call-ins a little later on in the day if you guys have opinions on it. I know that we have some communists come through chat, some far-left people, perhaps even socialists who might have an opinion on this. But in a few minutes, we're going to get started. I'm going to be asking questions about particular and more broad luxury experiences, items, things that are very common in a capitalist society, even in a feudalist society. Luxury under communism is what we're going to be talking about today.
Hell yeah, let's do it.
Hell yeah. We are caffeinated. Well, we're partially caffeinated, my dude. I got the coffee going like 10 minutes ago, and I'm having my first cup now, but I will show you guys. I've got the whole pot right here, bro.
Nice. Yeah, I'm a little hungover today.
Oh, really? What'd you do last night?
Yeah, so I've got my coffee going, but you know, me and my wife, we just drank all night, and we were listening to music. We kind of decided, like, let's pretend that it's, like, 2009, and we're listening to alt-rock radio, and let's just, like, play all the songs we remember from that period, and it was really fun, but we stayed up way too late, and I drank way too much. My wife didn't drink as much, but...
Oh, I see. I love that! That sounds like such a fun time.
Yeah, it was good times.
Hell yeah.
But I got my coffee going too, trying to get in the mindset here. Talk about some communism.
Heck yeah. Can I ask you a precursory question that I think is very important to the audience, most likely? Also, Hardware Barbecue, welcome back under the new name Roshan Fight. Fight, Roshan, fight. Are you a communist personally, Admiral?
I kind of am. I am in kind of like the G-Jack sense of like very broadly understanding communism as just kind of a new paradigm that's probably going to inevitably follow capitalism. I'm not one of these kind of capitalism is the end of history kind of people. But I'm not like a Marxist-Leninist or anything like that. I am kind of also like a liberal at the same time. Liberal in the political philosophy sense of like I'm like in terms of my actual political commitments, I'm committed to liberal democracy and kind of I actually have mostly kind of political establishment views, despite kind of like also holding that kind of ideology about communism, but. So it's kind of a nuanced answer.
I think that's interesting, and I think it is a very properly nuanced answer because communism obviously is not something that you're in the States, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the States obviously not currently under communism, and to that effect, communism is, as you said, an ideology. Idealism being part of that word, you know, I feel like what you're saying is that ideally you would be a communist.
Yeah, or it's not even really, well, it kind of is, but it kind of isn't an ideology. It's also kind of an analysis of capitalism and where we think capitalism is going to end up inevitably over the course of history. Mm-hmm. So I'm a communist in the sense that I don't think capitalism is going to last forever. I think it's maybe a better way of putting it.
Mm-hmm. Something that Holy Lazy Doug just pointed out in the chat that I didn't take express notes for this stream, by the way, you guys, and you guys know that's kind of uncommon for me, but I kind of want to just go off the fly and see what you guys were interested in, what I was interested in. But something that I did plan on was differentiating exactly what Lazy Duck just said. There are different definitions of luxury. Luxury can be nice little sweet things and the occasional nap. And, I think maybe a lot of communists might say, or I'm going to say idealists, maybe not so much just communists. Idealists might say, well, you should just be able to do that. That shouldn't be a luxury. And I agree. However, there are also things like, I'm gonna use this example a lot, Admiral. But there is something called an Hermes Birkin bag. It is considered a better investment than gold currently in our American stock market. And it is a line of luxury bags that can be worth between, I would say the lowest I've ever heard of one going used is like $25,000. And they can go for upwards of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. I don't know that I see them in the millions quite a lot, but I'm sure if they were owned by the right person and perfectly kept in condition, maybe an older version might go for millions of dollars. And because that is such a good indicator of how gold, in comparison with gold, which is sort of a static object, you can't do a lot with it just by itself. People don't really own bars of gold anymore. Coins that are made of platinum or gold are falling out of fashion. If you own a Birkin, perhaps you're thinking that you're going to retire on that one Birkin. You could resell it. And so those are the different levels of luxury that we're kind of going to look at today. And I'll see what Admiral thinks of both of these. Again, we haven't quite gotten started yet. But I want to point out that Lazy Duck has a great point, that luxury doesn't have just one definition.
That's definitely where we should start, is kind of talking about luxury as a concept and picking apart different ways of understanding it, and also kind of how that understanding has shifted over time, because I think it has. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that Duke University article that I linked to you. I'm going to post it in chat right now in case anybody wants to take a look at it. This doesn't have the answer to your question of what is luxury under communism or what that would be, but it does have a really good, thorough kind of breakdown of different understandings of luxury and how they shifted going into capitalism, and how some different political theorists have talked about luxury. So I think that's a really good read.
And I'm scanning through it right now, and I'm seeing a couple of really good keywords, like on luxury has an immediate quotation of extremely comfortable. And I want to point out that perhaps, hello Julep, welcome. Perhaps we could look at people who live extremely comfortably all the time, and we would say they live in the lap of luxury. If you're not familiar with that phrase, the lap of luxury, of course, being a state of being extremely comfortable all the time, and then luxuries, or having the luxury of doing something for a more commonplace person, would then of course be occasionally getting to be extremely comfortable. And again, that can be anything from going to a 5-star hotel for a week to taking a little nap,
Yeah, I think I think the easiest way to kind of think about luxury as a concept is just to kind of acknowledge that it's normative rather than objective. By that I mean there's social norms around what is what's like what's a kind of a excessive comfort, and what's like an actual kind of necessity, what's kind of useful, and what's actually just kind of like frivolously useful, you know? Like there's like, because there's useful things, right? But they're also kind of luxurious in that the use that they provide saves you effort on something that's really, really kind of not a big effort to begin with. You know what I mean? Yes. Like maybe like a Roomba, for example, like the silly little robot that's vacuuming your floors for you. Like, is that a luxury? It's useful. It's not completely unuseful. It's not really just like a comfort.
Yes.
And but it's also like this like really expensive kind of toy that saves you time on something that you could honestly just do yourself really easily.
Absolutely. My mom loves hers. She calls it Rosie the Robot after the Jetsons character, and she absolutely loves her Roomba. Then again, my mom is a very busy person. She has a full-time job. She has a husband with a full-time job. And she has my youngest sister, who is still in high school, doing 4 sports at a time, plus modeling and doing other wonderful things. Like, she's constantly driving someone somewhere. She's, you know, a very busy person. And so the luxury of having the Roomba is extremely useful and doesn't really afford her so much downtime as less uptime. You know?
Right.
And I want to bring in, really quick, I want to bring in the phrase luxury gay space communism.
Hell yeah. I knew we were going to get to that.
Thank you. I just want to point that out because I feel like that's the ideal for a lot of people, where people are thinking, you know, something like a Roomba, things that are very useful, that save you menial effort, are, how do I put this, going to be very commonplace in something like that, under something like luxury gay space communism.
Right. And there's one more word that's kind of missing in there, and it's automated gay space communism. Because I think a big part of this new kind of and we'll get into this because this is actually very different from what Marx had to say about luxury. But this new concept that automation is what's going to kind of finally break the back of capitalism. It's going to kind of solve the problem of scarcity and labor, and we're going to be able to just like chill because everything's going to be automated for us. That's kind of this new kind of ideological vision that you're seeing in the far left these days.
Mm-hmm. And there are 2 things that I want to get at. One is that I want to read Holy Lazy Duck's highlighted message just now. They say a lot of discussion needs to consider how what may be considered useless and pricey to one person may be essential for another person. A wheelchair, a prosthetic, even glasses. Perhaps we ought to append or prefix luxury to have a separation of these nebulous concepts. I would like to point out, just to preface this conversation, that I believe in a world where no matter what your system that you're living under could be, I believe that we live in a world where everyone who needs a wheelchair can have a wheelchair, and everyone who needs glasses can have glasses. And so when I started thinking about this conversation, and you guys know, asking around to see who would be interested in it, and thankfully AdmiralLove was interested and educated, I was not intending to speak about ability aids, or anything that might be considered extremely necessary for somebody. Right? And it can get a little bit more nuanced in the idea of like my mom's Roomba being necessary for her to have just a little bit less time to clean and a little bit more time to do the myriad of other things that she has to do. But mobility aids and ability aids, I believe, are something that need to be not left out of the conversation necessarily, but acknowledge that they can exist and be provided for everyone under the current system that we have right now.
And this is kind of why I said luxury as a concept is normative. And Julie Pop, however you say her name, she kind of said, well, you mean subjective, and it's like, yes, but what normative means as opposed to subjective is that we have social norms that we all kind of construct and agree to. So we all kind of recognize, right, that those kinds of things, classes, prosthetics, that's not a luxury to us, because we all as a society have kind of constructed the idea that like that's or intersubjective, that's another way to put it, right? But just on a very broad scale, we all recognize those are necessities, those aren't luxuries. You kind of need those things. Or even something like a smartphone these days, in our present society, that's pretty much a necessity now. That's not really a luxury. I know a lot of people might disagree with that, but that's what I mean, when I say it's normative. And then to add kind of another layer to that, there's also kind of a meta level of also how we judge luxury, because one of the things that gets brought up in that Duke article is how luxury used to be a good thing. It was a sign of social refinement, and with the advent of capitalism, it shifted and was what did they call it? They said demoralization. They said luxury as a concept was like demoralized over time, and it became seen as, oh, luxury is frivolous, it's excessive, you shouldn't need or want those things. And there's also like the concept of like conspicuous consumption, like oh, your Louis Vuitton bag is just a way to like signal to other people that you're superior or whatever. That's another.
So, and that makes me think of something that we spoke about last month on the stream, which is the idea that our entire moral system has shifted, obviously, in the past 1,000 years or so. We used to live under what I believe it's Nietzsche would have called, because it's his genealogy of morals that I'm talking about, wherein we used to live under a knightly, we used to live under what he called a knightly moral system, wherein it was good to be a powerful or luxurious or rich person. It was good to be all those things, but it wasn't necessarily bad to be without those things. It wasn't necessarily bad to be a serf, to be poor, to be sickly. It wasn't looked down upon, but it was unfortunate. It was just like, oh, like you can't be like the rest of us, essentially. That's so unfortunate for you. It was almost like that was part of serfdom, is that it was considered morally good to be powerful and to take care of those lesser people. And then you move into the priestly Christian genealogy of morals, wherein it is good to be meek and to be pious and to have a sense of humility, and even it is good to look down upon those who are evil, and those who are evil, who should be looked down upon, who should be sent to hell even, are the knightly class, the people who are powerful, the people who have luxuries. And so we've moved even farther, obviously now, into this new modern moral system where it is necessary to have luxuries and to not provide those, and I'm going to use the word luxuries loosely here, but to have things like smartphones and a very nice house in a nice neighborhood, and to have a nice car that is safe, which is kind of hard to come by. Things that would have been luxuries 100 years ago, extremely hard to come by, are now necessary to provide for your family. And if you're not providing your family a nice car and a nice house and nice things to wear, you're a shitty person. Does this kind of make sense? I'm not sure what I would call that, because obviously Nietzsche wrote the whole book about it and had this genealogy of morals idea. But this new modern era where like luxury is almost a necessity to be a good person is strange and backward.
Yeah.
When you say it like that, you know.
Yeah, Nietzsche kind of wrote that from the perspective of kind of looking at kind of Christian morality in particular. But there's other theorists who tie it even more closely to Christian morality as it adapted to the kind of new economic paradigm of capitalism. Specifically, Max Weber. I don't know if you've ever heard of Max Weber. He wrote a really influential book. What is it called? It's the Protestant Spirit of Capitalism or something like that.
Ooh.
He kind of argued, kind of a little bit conflicting with kind of Marx's analysis of how culture and capitalism interact. But he kind of argued that the sort of, have you heard the like phrase like the Protestant work ethic?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, like he was kind of the one who kind of identified that and how that kind of what Nietzsche would have called a slave morality kind of plays into capitalism in the sense that these Protestant theologies like Calvinism and whatnot, they would see like hard work and productivity and kind of the accumulation of wealth as a sign of kind of moral righteousness. And it wasn't exactly this kind of strict class warfare thing that somebody like Marx would have tried to make it out to be.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is a good way to segue into the other thing that I did want to discuss briefly, if it can be brief, which is you said at the outset of this discussion that you're not a Marxist-Leninist necessarily, although in an ideal world you could be a communist. If you guys weren't here, this is AdmiralLove. AdmiralLove is a hefty contributor to the production and the quality of this channel as a chatter and as someone who's in the Discord. And I wanted to ask you what you meant by the phrase, "I'm not a person who believes that communism is the end of history." Can you kind of explain
capitalism? That? Yeah, that capitalism is the end of history.
Capitalism is the end of history. Okay.
Yeah, are you familiar with Fukuyama?
No, I'm not.
He's a political theorist who wrote, I don't know if it's a whole book or I haven't actually read it, but it's a phrase that gets kicked around a lot. But basically, around the time the Soviet Union fell, he wrote like, "This is the end of history," and what he kind of meant by that is just that like. What Marx or other kind of leftists would identify as like the inevitable end of capitalism, because capitalism keeps kicking up these class conflicts and these financial crises that are like basically inevitably it's all going to fall apart and we're going to move on to this new phase of like and this new economic and political paradigm that we would call communism. He kind of rejected that at that time and said like, no, it's pretty much just going to be capitalism forever. Like that's and everything politically that's going to continue to happen is just going to be capitalism and liberal democracy continuing to like maintain the status quo in perpetuity. And I think that's something I reject. I do think that inevitably we are going to shift out of capitalism, and it's not ideological in the sense that I want it to happen or that it's prescriptive for me. It's descriptive for me. To me it's the most likely thing is that eventually the way that we produce and the way that we engage in the economy is going to fundamentally change at some point in the future. I don't think history has ended in that way.
I see. And I've read about that sort of thing philosophically, rather, wherein, like, there's some sense of, like, the end of philosophy for some people, which has been announced several times over the past 100 years, apparently. And I also completely disagree with this idea, because it's not that we are no longer going to be creating philosophy. And I more staunchly believe that now, after listening to Michael Sugrue talk about how after, immediately following pretty much every huge scientific shift in history that we have recorded, we have also recorded a huge philosophic shift. And so I think that just because we're not to that philosophic shift yet, people in the modern era who are very intellectualized about philosophy, they tend to say, well, this is the end of philosophy. We haven't solved anything, but we've also decided that philosophy is not going to be something that's going to be useful for people in the future. And I vehemently disagree, because we're going to need new methodologies of living and of thinking and of decision making as the hefty shift of social media and of the internet really sets in the next 50 to 100 years. So there was a... Oh, you're going to your volunteering event. That's so cool, Lazy Duck. Have fun. I hope you have a lot of fun. And really quick, since we're about half an hour in and I haven't done this, if you've never seen me before, hi, my name is Johnny. I am an educational streamer here on Twitch. We talk about philosophy, politics, history, math, science, everything in between. If that sounds cool to you, please do give the channel a follow. It's the best way to support this channel. And this is AdmiralLove. AdmiralLove is a contributor to the channel and a chatter, and is here to talk about luxury under communism. Now, to reset some of this, we have discussed so far that mobility aids, ability aids, things that are considered incredibly necessary things for life for disabled or or differently abled people, will not be discussed here, because I am a person who is going to say from the offset we should already be providing those things to people. However, there are a few different levels of luxury that we're going to have to talk about today. Luxury can be something that will eventually be put in a museum. And I know that some people will say, well, Johnny, obviously, all of the wonderful things that you're talking about, like Bentleys and Prada bags and $1 million earrings with 12-karat diamonds in them, all of those will just be put in museums under communism. I've heard that answer before, which is way too simplistic of an answer for what I'm really getting at with this question. But there are also simple luxuries.
Maybe this is a good point to kind of talk about what Marx kind of wrote about luxury, and then kind of contrast it with how the far left and communists today kind of think about luxury, because I think there's an interesting difference there. So for Marx, he kind of saw luxury as kind of definitionally they're goods that are being withheld from like the lower working classes and are kind of reserved through the economy for the middle and upper classes for their enjoyment. And this kind of gets into the political economics of Marx a little bit, because for Marx, he kind of believed that society and capitalists and the economy would constantly kind of adjust the amount of like goods and compensation that go to the working class, so that the working class can kind of quote unquote reproduce their labor. Basically, it means like they're always going to get just enough to be able to maintain their lives, have children, and come back to work. But that bare minimum, it's not just like food, shelter, necessities. It's again, even Marx acknowledged that it would be socially normative. It would be kind of what society has deemed like this sort of like basis is. How much can we get away with? Like what do we like socially get away with defining as the bare minimum of what the working class gets? And so from this framing for Marx, luxury is like kind of already definitionally always like something that you would want to get rid of when you move beyond capitalism, because you're no longer extracting value from labor and only giving them the bare minimum enough to reproduce their labor. And that's why for Marx there would be like an abolition kind of luxury when he accomplishes what's called the abolition of the commodity form. And that's a whole other like kind of rabbit hole to go down. I don't think we necessarily need to. But what I think is interesting is now you have, you know, your automated gay space luxury communists, right? Who have kind of remoralized luxury by kind of broadening its definition from what like Marx kind of strictly thought about it, and are instead saying like, no, once we automate everything and once we've kind of been freed from the necessity of labor, then everybody can have luxury, in the sense that what luxury really is are these like sort of excessively comfortable and pleasurable goods and services and whatnot, right?
Yes.
And yeah.
And my thought on that initially is like, I would assume that a lot of luxuries, small luxuries that are commodities, would not exist. I immediately think of something totally unnecessary to society, like a fucking Snickers bar or something. You're not going to be making money on excess people having a little bit of excess money and buying themselves a Snicker bar on their lunch break, because that brand is not going to exist. That corporation is not going to exist. You know, people will be still working technically to keep society moving under communism, but the Snickers factory is probably not going to be one of the main things that Chesoteric, welcome. It's probably not going to be one of those things that survives, right?
Here's how a communist would kind of argue against this.
Okay.
They would point out that under capitalism, there's a certain logic to how we produce goods, and it's not to produce useful goods for people. It's to produce goods that can be exchanged for more value than what went into producing them. So the commodity in capitalism kind of has these two parts. There's a use value, there's what people actually want when they consume the end product, and then there's an exchange value. There's like the amount of profit and money you can get from a Snickers bar. And all communism really is saying like, let's not worry about the exchange value, because we're no longer exchanging goods for the sake of generating profit for a capitalist. We're now producing goods so that people have the use value that they want out of the goods. So as long as people still want Snickers bars, then there's still a logic in communist production to produce the Snickers bars for people, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. That kind of brings me to something that I have a visual aid for. I went to an anime convention this past weekend, and I bought this beautiful little print of a piece of artwork. This is wholly unnecessary to my life, other than to go, when I get something proper, to affix it to the wall, right here in the background of my stream, to sort of complete the tableau. I want this beautiful piece of art. It's absolutely lovely. It's by an artist named Caroline Bergen. I want this. I accept that Caroline Bergen will probably be creating these beautiful pieces of art. And I accept that under communism, anime conventions will probably still exist, because all you really need for that is a bunch of people to show up who like something, But I also, as a non-communist, perhaps even, oh God, as a capitalist, a very soft capitalist, I want her to be compensated somehow for this beautiful piece of art that I took from her. And this luxurious little piece of art that I wanted, that I took from her, needs to be, and Julep says she would be doing her part. Her part is creating something that does not keep me in a nice house with a roof on it, that does not keep the water running, that does not keep the electricity running, right? It literally just kind of puts things on paper. And so I disagree with communism because I believe that someone like Caroline Bergen should be, in a way that is tangible, compensated for her art. And so I assume that a communist would say something like, well, your little luxury, your little piece of art, Johnny, you could always exchange. You could exchange something useful to her. You could give her eggs.
Well, that's kind of where that communist maxim comes in. What is it? From each according to their abilities, to each according to their needs, right? It's the idea that you no longer, like, exchange is no longer the paradigm for how we produce and distribute goods, right? We do what we can, and we get what we need and want. Like, that's kind of more of the fundamental shift in kind of the whole, like, logic of the economy under communism. And so I feel like the idea of being concerned for the artist's compensation, it's because we're still in the capitalist paradigm. Like it's that's a concern that's very much kind of like rooted in how things are right now. So like, and it's kind of like, it feels like an abstract kind of cop out, right? But that's kind of what like communism really is, I think, is like just kind of the abstract kind of positing of a completely different logic for how we go about economics.
I see. And it's easier for me to say something like, okay, you have very obvious, very exclusive luxuries, like I was mentioning something like 10 karat diamonds or something. 10 karat diamonds. Sayo, thank you so much for the follow. Welcome to the family. Something like a 10 karat diamond would not be used, I would assume, in a perfect world, even not under communism. In a perfect world, I wouldn't have that 10 karat diamond be used for something like an earring that only one person can buy and wear. I would have it be used for something like technology, because things like diamonds and silicon and other mined commodities, platinum, silver, etc., those are very useful for things that we actually need, like microchips and technology, etc. And so I fully accept that something like that, something like a 10 karat diamond earring, would just not be produced anymore. And it would be used instead for something very useful.
I think there's that. So there's kind of two things here. The first is the idea that maybe when we're in this other economic paradigm that we call communism, that we just don't kind of value those things in the same way, because commodities to us no longer have exchange value. They just have use value. So maybe there's certain things where the actual use value is just way more than its aesthetic value, and its exchange value based on its scarcity. So a diamond it's a diamond is aesthetic. It looks really nice, but then maybe it's also just so useful as an electronics component that that use value just kind of outweighs the aesthetic value. And it just wouldn't be like considered like by a communist society. It just wouldn't be considered like a desirable thing to have a diamond ring. So that's one possibility. The other possibility, or the other thing to acknowledge, is that scarcity is still going to be inevitable in any economy, whether it's communist or capitalist or whatever. And so there needs to be kind of different ways of thinking about how you distribute scarce goods under communism, where there's no longer this entitlement based on money and commodity exchange. And there's different kind of ideas about how you could do this. Like you could have a lottery system where maybe you have an artist who is creating this painting or this piece of art, or a jeweler who's creating fine jewelry, and anybody who wants or desires that product, puts their name in a hat, and you draw the name out of the hat, and whoever gets it gets it. And I think that's one way you say. The other thing you could do is, you could shift artistic creation in general towards making public works of beauty. The idea that anything that you make would go into a museum where everybody can enjoy it, or would just be like, out in the open. Like the idea that, instead of billboards advertising products everywhere, what if like every billboard just had like an original, beautiful piece of art on it?
Absolutely.
So there's tons of these kinds of different ways of supposing and thinking through solutions, or kind of positing different kind of shifts in thinking in general around these things.
Yeah, and this is exactly where I would say something like the museum argument from a communist would be totally valid for, let's say, a piece of jewelry that's been owned by many different very famous people over the years. And yes, communism has come to fruition. We no longer are going to keep those things exclusive, but we, for the sake of, I would hope, for the sake of for the sake of learning from the past, we would not destroy those things, right? We have this historic problem that you may be aware of, where human beings will go through a major shift in how they live their lives and their governmental systems, and we will destroy relics of the past. And we will no longer be able to learn from those things because they are not widely available for people to behold and to have a sense of context for. And so something like the crown jewels, in a world where there is no more monarchy, might be put in a museum, and we might, take the kids to the museum and say, God, look at that huge diamond that could have been used for something really useful, like technology. Instead of doing that, we put it in this big, beautiful, aesthetic thing. And not only do you get to enjoy that aesthetic thing now publicly, but you also get to learn from it. You also get to say, God, we probably shouldn't make stuff like that anymore because it's actually kind of wasteful and exclusive.
Yeah.
I think that's one case where that idea of luxury becoming a public work, especially if it's historic, especially if it's an antique, totally applies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to like be able to go to a museum and like actually have like I get my turn to like put on the crown jewels, like actually wear them and like take a selfie with them. Like,
oh my god,
that'd be so funny.
That would be really good, and we could probably do something like that as long as it's not millions of people. Although that's kind of the point, isn't it? If you're going to disperse this thing among millions of people are going to want to try on the crown jewels, bro.
Yeah, it's funny. It's a funny idea, but yeah, I don't know. I just think there's like a lot of different ways of thinking through potential solutions, thinking through the different ways that we might just kind of like interact with objects in general. One thing I wanted to bring up and kind of point out, art is kind of a separate thing from luxury. It's kind of entwined with luxury, but it's also completely different when you think about it. Because artistic creation, it's almost like a compulsive form of expression by the artist. Like, I do think that artists will always continue to create, regardless of whether or not their creations are being treated as these highly valuable, scarce commodities, and whether or not there's kind of this wealthy society that are like patrons of the art and kind of support their creation. And I think the fact that we do have this kind of rarefied fine art community that's supported by the wealthy has actually led to like the absurdity of modern art. Like, I would bring up, like, for example, I don't know if you're familiar with Duchamp's Fountain.
Fountain. I know the movie The Fountain. I'm not.
Duchamp's Fountain is the urinal that this Dadaist painter and artist just signed. He just signed a urinal and set it up in an art exhibit.
Kind of like Piss Christ.
Yeah, there's all sorts of stuff like that, right? Like, just completely absurd art. And I think part of the reason why modern art really went so hard in that direction is precisely because it started the social dimension behind art and the support of art started to kind of like force artists down this kind of rebellious kind of path where they a lot of these artists and these movements really wanted to demonstrate kind of the absurdity of the support that they were getting from a wealthy elite. And I think maybe that's something that's interesting to think about, like what happens when artists are kind of more supported by the whole of society as opposed to the elite of society, and what happens to their kind of like motivations for how they choose to like express themselves.
Absolutely. And if you're not familiar with Piss Christ, it's just a jar with a little pre-made statue of Christ in it on the cross, I think, and the guy pissed in the jar. And there's a lot of debate actually to this day, less so I think about Duchamp's Fountain. I think that's way more obviously what you're talking about, this rebelliousness of I'm just going to do something, and if you pay for it, that's on you. But Piss Christ has a lot more debate around it as to whether or not it actually meant something, whether the artist actually intended to send a big message about Christianity or anything like that, which adds a little bit more nuance to the supposed value of it as art. I consider myself, I am an artist. I do know how to do art. I'm relatively good at it, but I am a curator at heart. My house, everything I decorate with, my sense of like collecting things in order to make my place of home aesthetically pleasing.
Like your thrift store portrait that everybody always asks about, like, oh, is that your family?
Is that your parents? No, they're just random people.
That's some of the best curation I've ever seen. It's so good.
Thank you so much. They were $10 and they have more than exceeded their value of $10 in the joy that me and other on this stream have gotten from them, right? That sense of curation is absolutely something that is intrinsic to what I am as an external. I intend to curate, especially the outer, more public portions of my home. I intend for that to be a place where you can come as a person and just be comfortable and aesthetically pleased. It's not just for me. It is, although I have, and that's kind of the point I'm getting at, I have this real sense of like, it is like a need to be around things that I find artistically valuable. And as I grow as a person, as I become a more wealthy or affluent adult, I do plan on buying more and more like valuable pieces of art. There is an artist who does what she calls thread painting. She's a not muralist, that's not what I'm looking for. She creates tapestries. And I've seen her work many, many, many times at a gallery in New Orleans. Her name is Chris Roberts-Anto. She has a particular piece that's about $9,000. It is a beautiful, incredibly lifelike bluebird flying over a full moon. It's square, it has a black background. It is incredibly aesthetic and beautiful and wonderful to me because I've seen it in person. I plan on buying a copy of that piece when I have $9,000 to spend. Like, as soon as it happens, I'm getting that piece. And it's not a compulsion necessarily, but it is a curation. It is like something where I want to preserve these pieces of art. I want more original works of art. I want more antique things. I collect bar mirrors from the 1970s and 80s. Fun fact about me, my whole kitchen and dining room area is covered in antique bar mirrors.
That's so cool.
Well, I inherited my first round of them from my grandparents, who actually ran a bar for upwards of 40 years. So it was so cool. It was kind of set upon me to do that, but then I became really passionate about it. And so, like, that sense of curation and that sense of, what is the word I just used? That sense of preservation is really important to me as an art collector. And so that sense of luxury of, oh, this is just something to decorate my house, it doesn't really apply necessarily. Having an aesthetically pleasing house is something that really mentally benefits a lot of people just on its baseline, you know? And so it becomes more and more nuanced when you talk about it like that. For someone to be genuinely mentally stimulated by collecting and displaying these things, even if it's just for themselves.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, and that brings me away from this idea that it is an unnecessary luxury that would just disappear.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's, you know, like, again, it's like, it depends on whether we're trying to, like, kind of stick to a strict definition of luxury, or whether we're kind of just accepting that, that luxury is kind of relative, and we're like acknowledging that comforts are also kind of needs, or you know, the appreciation of aesthetic value is also kind of a social need, and or just not like, I don't even think the dichotomy is between luxury and actual need. It's almost more like whether the value of something is like excessive or not excessive, right? And I think it's very easy to say, like, yeah, that desire to curate art, to surround yourself with really beautiful pieces, and to also want to preserve them, that's maybe not an excessive thing, so that we would even call it luxury. But I don't know.
I just imagine this. There's this pretentiousness about deciding what level of, the word comfort is really applicable here, what level of comfort and mental stimulation and aesthetically pleasing home life is acceptable across the board for all people, right? And that's kind of where I still sit, admittedly, in my very uneducated view of communism and of these idealist spaces.
I totally agree. I do think there's maybe a hard line to draw at a certain point where in capitalism there are certain goods where you literally just slap a certain brand name on it, you call it scarce, and there's no actual underlying phenomenon to what makes it luxurious or superior to like again, like Louis Vuitton bags or shit like that. A lot of like high fashion clothing. It's the idea that it's kind of the most abstract idea that it's just scarce, and that's actually the reason why. And that's like this is Thorsten Veblen's idea of conspicuous consumption. Again, that it's kind of almost purely symbolic to own these things and to display them publicly, just so that people know that you were able to obtain them, and there's like kind of a purely symbolic social value to that. And I think that's definitely a line you can draw when you can say like, okay, that's not necessary, or that's like just by definition that should just be considered excessive, hard stop, right? That's like the one line I think I'm comfortable drawing, where it's like, oh yeah, that's definitely like a form of luxury that I don't think anybody really needs. We could probably like do away with that.
Absolutely. Branding is the essence of the phrase I want to use is false exclusion, right? It is wholly unnecessary. For instance, I have a tried and true belief, but also experience, that leather shoes last longer than fake leather plastic shoes. That is just a thing. I'm not a vegan. Please, if you're a vegan, don't come for me right now. It's not necessarily the debate we're having at this moment in time. I accept that you're vegan and I think that you're a wonderful person. But leather lasts longer, especially in shoes. And so I am currently in the process of saving up for a very nice pair of leather boots, right? And the fact that the Coach leather boots have a little gold C on the back shouldn't fucking matter, because I want them because they're going to last longer. However, the cute little Coach C and the little gold plating is admittedly very, very enticing.
Yeah.
You know? And it shouldn't be. That truly is one of those places where I am fully agreeing with you that that there is a mental state, a mental sickness or strain of disease, you know, to put it really out there, wherein it's just like, that is a wholly unnecessary line of thought, and people have been so inundated with the idea that it's just nicer to buy that pair of Coach boots rather than the other pair. And then again, there's a lot of advantages to a large corporation, where someone like Coach can maybe offer leather boots for $100. But if you're going to the person on Etsy, and this is where we get into some really small time money that is actually highly luxurious. It is so luxurious to go on to a website like Etsy or Instagram and find someone who hand crafts small batch leather boots. There's only like 10 pairs made a year because that's all this one person can do by themselves. And you pay $500 for this small batch handcrafted pair of leather boots.
Yeah. And it's like almost like, maybe that line isn't as easy to draw as I think now that you're talking about this, because it's like, you know, maybe part of it is that you would buy those boots on Etsy, and you would be able to brag to people about like how exclusive where they come from, you know. But then maybe it's also you genuinely kind of appreciate the story and the idea of supporting a craftsman, and that can be genuine and legitimate, and so yeah, I don't know, maybe it's not as hard to like draw that line in the way I was suggesting earlier.
Absolutely. It becomes this idea where even under a system where we're not necessarily, everybody needs shoes, right? There's still gonna be shoes under fucking communism, but there's still going to be a value of, wow, I could have gone to the local boot craftsman, and I could have gotten this very economically is not the word anymore, but I could have gotten this very ecologically friendly, environmentally friendly pair of very small batch handcrafted boots that didn't do a lot of damage to the environment. They only made 10 pairs this year. I could do that, or I could go to the local slightly larger communist boot factory and get the pair that's mass produced, because I still believe that mass production is something that is inherently valuable on some level.
Right.
And that distinction, that level of exclusion is so hard to imagine in a world where I can't just decide how much money I'm gonna pay for either given pair.
Yeah,
right?
Again, it would have to be like distributed like through like maybe some kind of lottery system or something, or maybe like maybe it's also about kind of reframing economics locally. But yeah, I get what you're saying. Like, and that's why I mentioned earlier. The problem with scarcity doesn't go away under communism, I don't think, and there's just all sorts of ways you could suppose that you handle the reality of scarcity. And it could mean that it does make it more difficult for you to kind of make the free choice to obtain scarce goods kind of at will. Like, if there was some kind of like lottery system for it, it's like, I know that I really want the handcrafted boots instead of the factory boots. I'm going to, I don't have the freedom anymore to say like, well, I'm gonna, instead of spending my money on this, or this, I'm going to like exercise the choice to like put it all down on that pair of boots. Instead, you'd have to like take your lottery ticket and stick it in the hat and just hope you get it. And that kind of sucks. It does kind of suck.
It's so funny to me that the idea of a lottery could be fair. Does that make sense? I find the whole idea of a lottery to be inherently unfair.
I mean, it is and it isn't. Like, it depends on your framing of it, right? It's socially fair, but then it's individually unfair, right? Like, it depends on the scale that you're looking at it. Like, it's socially fair in the sense that, like, across all of society, maybe you don't have any greater right than anybody else to that luxury good. And so it's a fair thing to just say, like, we're not going to give this out based on entitlement. We're going to have everybody have an equal shot of getting it that wants it. But then as an individual, again, you've been kind of robbed of that exercise of choice that you have under capitalism. But then again, here's the thing, though. Under capitalism, it's almost just as much of a lottery. Like, even if you're willing to pay the exorbitant price for that super rare good, you're still competing with other people to get the opportunity to pay for it first, right? Like, these people, they run out, they sell out super, super fast. Like, there's the controversy of people trying to get Taylor Swift tickets, and like literally sitting and like refreshing the Ticketmaster page or whatever, and just being seconds off and losing their opportunity to be able to go see Taylor Swift. Like that's like it's a thing under capitalism too. Like it's the idea money doesn't completely solve that.
It definitely is a factor, and even just the lottery-esque system of getting a job. It's not always about who is the most qualified. It could be about whose resume was submitted first. And so it's a lottery-esque system, just getting the job to get the money to have the free choice to buy the boots.
Right, yeah. Yeah, there's that level of it too.
And then there's like this very strange level of need. And I know I'm getting hyper specific with this right here, but let's say that you live under this system where you can get a very nice pair of leather high heels, for instance. You really need those because you have a wedding to go to this year. The person to your left who really also wants the nice leather high heels, but who doesn't have a wedding to go to this year, doesn't really have anything to dress up for coming up, they just really want it. You kind of, in a very identifiable way, have a greater need.
Yeah, that's true. For
that nice pair of shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And it just There's so much nuance to the phrase need and the phrase and to the word like necessity, that is highly variable over time.
Yeah. But I mean, that's true. But it's also not something that gets recognized under capitalism either, I guess. That's just kind of the way it is in general, like the movie like Jingle All the Way with Arnold Schwarzenegger trying to get the toy for his kid and fighting with Sinbad to get the toy, and at first you think that his need is greater because of his strained relationship with his son and the divorce and whatnot, and then you learn that Sinbad kind of has the same story too. They have that kind of truce moment where they're at the coffee shop and they have that conversation where it's like they let you in on the idea that like, well, nah, he's not the bad guy. He's doing the same thing Arnold Schwarzenegger is doing. He's trying to get the thing, and that's how I think that's a problem that's related to scarcity itself, not to communism or capitalism, I think.
Absolutely. And exactly what you said earlier, scarcity is not just going to disappear. The idea that there are infinite pairs of boots is not going to magically appear. Everybody's not going to get a pair of boots. It just, and I have this problem when I do ask people and talk about communism, is that I kind of devolve, and this is a me problem, but I kind of devolve into all of these like really currently applicable hyper-specific situations where in communism wouldn't work, but then I have to personally reframe and say, okay, in a world where we are all having our needs met and no one is inherently more prepared to just buy a luxury thing like a yacht or something like that. Maybe the whole wedding scenario is just not applicable. Maybe it would just be okay to wear whatever you already have, instead of it being this societal expectation of like, oh, you have to go out and get something super nice. You have to get something that you're not going to wear on an everyday basis in order to come to my big event, because there's not money to spend on the big event, and there's not excess to be used up on this wedding and travel, etc. And so that kind of goes back into, well, your whole mind frame has to change in order to even imagine the world that we are imagining here.
Exactly. And I think this is this is a very broad problem when it comes to conversations about capitalism and communism. I mean, especially in like Twitch poll or online in general, but everybody wants to frame it as capitalism versus communism. And I don't even think that's like the correct way to have these conversations, because one is an exercise of like practical dealing with reality and how to make really concrete good outcomes like right here and now. Whereas when we're talking about communism, we're exercising imagination. That's what we're really doing. We're imagining a different future and a different paradigm, and it's not. Yeah, I don't. It's not that we're it's not really even that we're arguing that that it's necessarily like not better. I don't know how to say it. I just think like the conversations tend to be kind of more combative than they need to be. Mm-hmm. I think it's always, if you're going to have the political conversation and talk about the problems of capitalism and how to address them, then really what you should be doing is talking about socialist policy in the context of liberal democracies and the current capitalist paradigm, right? Like that's the productive political conversation to have. I think the conversation about communism isn't really meant to be political in that same way.
And that is a can of worms to open, because we just had a commenter, Roland Stott, come in, and they asked, okay, so this is an imagination exercise, essentially. How does it impact Admiral's voting right now? And you kind of already answered that question, right?
I think we all have very long view ideals and values, and what we all do is we let them inform how we deal with our immediate reality. We let those values inform our practical decisions, our policy decisions. And it's always the most frustrating people to deal with in politics are the revolutionaries who think that you can realize your values in their purest form, like immediately, right? That's extremism, no matter whether it's fascist or communist or whatever, you know. And like those are the most frustrating, counterproductive people to ever deal with in politics.
Absolutely, because I was just thinking about, again, I am not a communist. I am not an educated person on different nuances of different types of communism, but something that I do know, at least tangentially, about Far Eastern communism is that it was, and it's not necessarily this way now, I don't think at all. But what I believe to be the case is that someone like Mao would have intended for communism to be a continual revolution. I've heard that phrase before.
Yeah.
For people to continue.
I think it's Trotsky. Maybe he said the same thing, but he had the famous phrase of the like constant state of revolution or something like that. But yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like this continual state of people bettering their society by being dissatisfied with something, expressing their dissatisfaction however they may do it, whether it be violently or politically, and changing. And on some level, I agree that politically, to be dissatisfied is to have a reason to vote and to volunteer and to be engaged in your system overall, you know? And so you could put that on its head and say, well, if you're satisfied, you still need to be engaged. You still need to volunteer and be a part of the system, because you have to maintain that level of engagement in order to continually be satisfied. And I agree with that as well. It's just this idea that some amount of non-engaged voting can immediately change something, and then on its head, what you were just talking about with extremism, some amount of perhaps violent uprising can immediately change something for the better. And that, even to me, is even more ridiculous, because the whole point of that would be to raise the ground. And raise as in R-A-I-Z for those of you listening. Raise society to the ground and start over from scratch. That is the point of violent extremism. And the idea that it could immediately make something better is laughable, to say the least. You know?
Right. Definitely. Yeah.
It is...
Well,
yeah.
Sorry. Sorry. I have to duck out soon. I got some errands I got to go run with the wife.
Absolutely. And I was just about to launch into, like, sort of a overall... wrap-up. Overall wrap-up, yes. And
sure.
I want to thank you very much for engaging in this with me, because I know...
thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. I know that it's not like...
It's a super fun conversation.
I'm glad. I know that it's not like, necessarily something that has a neat tie-up or anything. I know that it's not something that has absolute, concrete, set in stone values that we can absolutely talk about, But at the same time, I think that's what makes it fun.
Yeah, definitely. These are my favorite conversations to have, really. Because I went to college for political theory. I don't know if I've told you that or anybody.
Okay.
Yeah, so these are the kinds of people who think that, there's, that, college, especially if you're in the social sciences or something, it's all leftist indoctrination. And there are definitely leftists who completely lack nuance and patience but I had a lot of these kinds of conversations in college, and they were all super fun, and there were a lot of diverse viewpoints and interesting arguments that were kind of very much the same style of conversation. So I don't get to do it a lot anymore as a working adult, but that's why this was like so fun for me. And
yeah,
really
thank you so much. Admiral, do you have anything that you would like to advertise? Do you have any projects going on, or any? Do you have a channel that you regularly stream on? Would you like to shout anything out for yourself?
I'm still working on my album. I have really crappy demos. You can find them on SoundCloud under the name Dear Rat Boy.
Hell.
So that's what I'm working on right now. Working on music. So if anybody's curious, you can check it out there. But otherwise, be good, be safe, peace and love.
Thank you so much, dude. We will see you very soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. That was awesome. That was super cool. I will encourage Admiral to post those links in the Discord. I'm putting the Discord link here right now for anyone who's new. These are also my other tangential socials as well, if you'd like to follow me on Twitter or subscribe to the Patreon or anything. There, of course, won't be notes for this particular stream because I didn't take any notes. You should get an accelerationist next. Oh, that would be very interesting. And, part of that, Julep, is that, I don't do a lot of arguments, debates on my stream, and it would be really, really interesting to see how I react in a conversation with someone like that. But if I could find somebody who could be, when I think of accelerationism, I don't think of the word reasonable, but if I could find someone who could be a little bit calm and reasonable and not immediately start a huge argument and a screaming match, that would be a really interesting conversation. Yeah, it doesn't have to be a debate. You're right. It could just be me, it could just be me asking questions and trying to be a neutral party, which I'm definitely okay at, Yes, Admiral, accelerationism is a very interesting topic. You can always have a normal discussion, like with Admiral. Exactly. Which, like, it's easy with Admiral because Admiral's not like a staunch communist who's trying to convince me of something. They're just an educated person. Like he said, he's educated in political theory. You know, but nonetheless, if anyone knows of anyone who is maybe already a streamer and has a setup that would be easy to integrate, and they don't have to be a streamer, they could just be somebody that you know who has access to Discord, please do give them a link to contact me and let me know that they might be contacting me. That would be very helpful. I can also sort of go through my personal subset of streamers that I know of and see if they're interested, or see if anybody there that they are attached to would be interested. That is an excellent idea. Thank you, Julep. Hell yeah. Alright. And that being said, my friends, I think that is a good time to wrap this up. I really appreciate you guys being here, and I know that when I have conversations like this, it's not as easy for me to be as engaged in the chat as I normally am, but I was scanning, I was seeing you guys, you know, put really good stuff in the chat, and hopefully, if I do put this up on YouTube with Admiral's permission, I will be able to maybe make some notes about good stuff that you guys put in chat as well. And that will perhaps be helpful. We love having the chat up on the stream. Shout out to Mr. Tuna Chip, a fellow streamer who has also edited my entire stream layout. He's fabulous. Yeah, thank you guys so much. This was super fun, and big shout out to Admiral. Again, Admiral, if you get a chance, please do put a link to your SoundCloud in the Discord in the general chat so that everybody can click on it. I'm gonna need to go listen to your music as well. Hooray! A good conversation. Bye-bye. Mythos, thank you for being here. And Julep and Ross Cal, Roland Stott. Motherfucking We All Can Prosper. I saw you putting a lot of really interesting stuff in the chat as well. Thank you. Ellen Ellison, I saw you put some cool stuff in the chat. That's pretty true. McFly, thank you all so much for being here. And again, a huge shout out to the AdmiralLove. All right. I will see you guys on the next one. Bye-bye.